Welcome to On the Soul's Terms podcast, a weaving of astrology, Greek mythology, and depth psychology. I'm Chris Skidmore, an astrologer, psychotherapist, and craniosacral therapist living in Ubud, Bali. Hello and welcome back, and thanks for tuning in for this second part of our tour through the houses as we enter, in fact, that second house, the house of resources, of money, of the body, of value, of self-worth, and our values, amongst a few other things. So this is where we get into the earthy realm. We're going to leave behind the more ethereal first house and enter and into the grounding of the second. So we'll have a look. We've been in this house, this first house, and we've had a chance in the first episode just to have a look around and maybe do a bit of dusting and spring cleaning and make sure that our first house is in good order. And then we leave it behind. We say thank you to the first house and we wander off through the path in the forest. And as we walk for a little while, another house appears, and this is our second house. The fairy tale that showed up for the first house was that of Rumpelstiltskin, who got so angry and annoyed and frustrated with life that he got named. It just felt so unfair to him that he did something very peculiar that is wouldn't really work in the logical world, but can work in the illogical world of fairy tales, the magical world. And what did Rumpelstiltskin do? Well, he slammed his left foot into the ground and tore himself in two. He was that angry at being named. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? This daimon and this daimonic figure of the Rumpelstiltskin, this little man, his slamming himself into the earth was actually, in a way, his undoing. And this can feel like the relationship between all of that potentiality, all of that vision of that first house, and then suddenly we've entered the second house and we have to contend with things like our limits. Like, think about that when the baby first tries to crawl and first tries to actually use this body. It's all very clumsy, and I can imagine the consciousness that's wrapped inside that body being very annoyed and furious with the idea that you can't actually move this thing. Like, it takes quite a lot to get it to do what you want it to do. And you can sometimes see that on the face of toddlers and babies as they try to figure out how this thing works, this body. And maybe, with the body, we're not really given an instruction manual, are we? We're not really told exactly how this thing works. It's just kind of assumed that we'll figure it out as we go, that our instincts will kick in, and then, we'll make it work. But of course, along the way, and this is why the second house is so interesting, well, we have to start to make this relationship with the physical world and with the body and with food and with drink and with touch and all of these things that, when they go right can be very beautiful things, but when they go wrong can cause us all sorts of trouble and mayhem in the world, can't they? Yeah, we have to pull ourselves up. We have to make it work. We have to figure it out. And as I said, there's not really such a good instruction manual of exactly what it means to have a body. So we've gone from the I am of that first house and we've moved into the I have of the second house. We ground the body in the material world and the resources. It's interesting if you think about the sun. When the sun is moving through the second house, it's between about 2 and 4 a.m. So it's in that very dark part of the night. And in fact, many of the things we talk about in the second house are in the very dark part of the night. For instance, if you think about your friends and the people that you know and your colleagues, what do you know about their story with money? What do you know about their story with self-worth, how they really feel about themselves? What do you know about what they really deeply value, what their core values are? Just like the sun going through at 2 to 4 in the morning, it can feel like that with the second house. It's like in the very dark places of night. And it's also interesting that it's between 2 and 4 in the morning. Now, if you're asleep at that time, which most nights I imagine we are asleep at that time, then this is the time when we're slowing down the most, when the body and the metabolism is really at its slowest. And there's a deep resourcing going on. In fact, it's probably the closest time of the day that we do get to the essence of that word, which is resource. So we're really plugging ourselves back into the source at that time. It actually makes me think of the story of Psyche on her final task, where she has to go down to the underworld to get a beauty potion for Aphrodite. She has to get that beauty potion from Persephone. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, who has some associations here with the second house, given that she's the ruler of Taurus, and Taurus is associated with the second house. So Aphrodite has asked Psyche, and Psyche might be more associated with the first, or maybe the whole self. She needs to go down and talk to Persephone, goddess of the underworld, and ask her for this beauty lotion or this beauty potion. Persephone gives her a box and says, don't open it. And so as she's coming back up from the underworld, and this is like that 2 to 4 a.m. thing when we're coming back up from the underworld, we haven't woken up yet, hopefully, but we are in that realm of the witching hour, and the sun is making its way back towards the eastern horizon. It's at that point that Psyche opens the box, and what is revealed is not a beauty ointment at all, but a deep sleep takes over her, which is interesting because that sometimes is exactly what the body needs, the deep healing component of sleep. And the deeper that we can go and the more still that we can get in the nighttime, the more healing that our bodies can access. And of course, at that point, Psyche was in fact trying to freshen up a little, because she realized she was coming to the end of her 4 tasks and she was about to meet the beloved Eros. She was thinking, I'll just take a little bit of this beauty potion, couldn't hurt anyone. And of course that knocks her out. She goes unconscious. Even though she didn't fully succeed, there was a success in that she got to that deep, restful place inside of herself. So if the first house was that first breath, then it's the body that is the one that does the breathing. It's the body that breathes. So just have a feel into that, what the difference is between that first and second house. So as you're looking at this house, you see what's written on the door of the house, and you go in and you have a look around. It's like, well, what is here in this house? You know, how do you take care of your physical things, your body, your possessions, your stuff? How do you take care of that? Is it just thrown all over the room here? Is it kept very neat and tidy? Is this a house you just don't really think about and therefore just kind of don't really go into very much? Where do we tend to keep our valuables? Sometimes it can be down in the basement there or in the crypt. Where are your valuable things, and how do you know that they have value, right? How do you know that these things are valuable and have value? In fact, how do we make that distinction between what is valued and valuable and our values? You know, the things that we hold dear and precious, the things that we don't want to waver on. We don't want to sell those things out. We want to make sure we know what our values actually are. And this is also here in this second house. And then how do we know what is worth, right? Where do we get the idea of what we find worthy and what we find not worthy? And how do we know when we are worthy of something or not worthy of something? Whatever story we have about our own worth, that's the story that we'll be playing out unconsciously into the world. So this is a very important question to get into in this particular house. And have a look around in this house and see, well, what's the answer to this for me personally? What do I think of myself? What do I feel when I come to contemplate the self? Do I feel like the doors are going to open for me, or do I feel like the doors are going to close for me? If I do get opportunities, do I feel like I don't deserve those opportunities, or do I feel like I deserve every opportunity? It's like somewhere in here we get into that realm of inflation or deflation, and our self-concept really starts to form itself through here. And then the body. You know, the body is essentially our first possession, isn't it? It's my body and I will go together till the very end, right? To the very end of this life. And when my body goes, I go. And when my mind goes, my body goes. And so then what does it mean to be in the body? The word that is quite popular these days is kind of like the somatic therapy language that's gotten out into the mainstream is the word dissociation or dissociative states. So what is it to be in a dissociative state? That's the experience when we are floating away. We're no longer in our body, and we may be floating above our body. It's like sometimes in a dissociative state, we can feel a sort of freeze, or it can feel cold in the body, or just numb or empty in the body, and the consciousness is floating off somewhere else. So it's interesting in somatic therapies, if somebody does go into a dissociated state, one of the ways to bring them back is just to get them to have a look around and just name a few things in the room. So what do you see? What do you hear? These kinds of things, like connecting back to the senses. And just that very simple act of having a look around and, I see this, I see that, or I hear this and I hear that. It just automatically brings us back to ourselves, which means it brings us back to our body. So what are we really doing there? Associating, again, is really the cure, in a sense, for dissociated states. And it has to be simple. It really has to be as simple as, and I encourage you to try this if you do go into those kinds of states. Just name a few things that you see, then name a few things that you hear. And that can often be enough to bring you back into your body, which is to bring you back into your senses. So one of the big topics of the second house is our relationship to money, which brings forward an enormous range of topics, actually. This is why the second house is such a fascinating house, because there's so much to get into here. One of the beautiful concepts is how to come into right relationship with the material world. And it's pretty easy to see, looking out into the world, that in so many ways we are not, at least the modern human being has gone so many steps away from being in something that we might call right relationship, which means that we're in a reciprocal relationship with nature. Money was perhaps something that was invented to facilitate this relationship between the material world and the humans. But obviously, over time, it has gone through many forms of distortion and come to be what it is today. So the first coins were minted at the Temple of Hera, or the Temple of Juno moneta. So moneta is where the word money, in fact, comes from. So we can see that money was once a sacred symbol, held in a temple, overseen by the mother goddess Hera. It was like a sacred oath to return things back to the mother. And how far we have come from that connection to the mother, or from that connection to Hera or to Juno's temple. Over time, obviously, as we know, quite famously, money was related to gold. Money was related to silver, like a pound is a pound in the UK, because that references a pound of silver that could be exchanged for that pound. But then as time has gone on, we all know famously in 1971, the currency is decoupled from the gold standard. So the US dollar is decoupled from the gold standard, and then all of the other currencies obviously followed suit. So then after that time, money really becomes much more conceptual, up until the point where today we have like the cryptocurrencies, which are more and more of a conceptual thing. So now money, what is it now? It's definitely, although it's still related to the second house, it's obviously floated away somewhere and away from any of its associations. So it's kind of like the dissociation of money is a very curious thing that has taken us into this kind of like other world. It becomes much more ethereal and much more floating. when we track back the story of money, we tend to think of, it was the barter system, and then money was introduced, and then it was used as this exchange energy. But if anybody's read the book The Gift by Lewis Hyde, Hyde goes into the prominence of gift economies, and the gift economy being a much more healthy and stable form of money. The gift just keeps moving around and around, and as long as it doesn't stop, then everybody is taken care of. And this sounds in the modern world like it might be some kind of really esoteric concept, but it wasn't at all. It was actually a very utilitarian concept. The idea that whatever was needed would go towards that person that needed it the most. And of course, these kinds of systems worked in much, much smaller situations than what we have today. And so it's very hard to imagine across the global economy, you just have too many people cheating a system like that for it to ever really work on the global level. But it's important to remember that resources do find their way around within this gifting economy. So yeah, the question is raised in this house: what is your relationship to money? What is your relationship to money? Do we try to buy love with money? Are we hoarders of money like the dragon that protects all the gold in the cave? Do we try to buy status with money? And one of the big questions that the second house really poses to us is, how much is enough? And do we know how much is enough? So again, just coming back to these questions, what do I value? And what are my values? Or what's my core values? What is enough, and how do I know when something is enough or when I have enough? Am I in right relationship with the material world? Do I live in connection with my body and its wisdom, or am I disassociated from it? And how far have I wandered from the Temple of Hera? So, a few myths that might help us get a little deeper into this house. Now, I'd like to look at two extremes of this equation when it comes to money and our relationship to the divine, or to the other worlds, or to the world of the gods. So in the Cretan story of Midas in Minoan culture, Midas wanted to display his wealth and power. And so he asked Poseidon to send a gift from the ocean to show that he was the most powerful and that he definitely did deserve the right to rule. Poseidon granted him this wish and sent forth from the ocean a glorious white bull, and then all of the people looked at that bull and said, yes, Midas is clearly the king. And so that's how he became the king, King Midas. But then when Poseidon asked him to sacrifice the bull back to the ocean, back to Poseidon, he couldn't do it. He treasured this bull more so than the gods. He wanted to hold on to the symbol more than what it was symbolic of. And he forgot that he only asked that so that he could be king, but then the symbol became what he was enraptured with. And the same can be true for us with money in the material world. This material, it becomes the symbol that we hold on to, that we cling to, or just like we talked about with those first moves as a newborn, we grip and we hold on to these things as though they'll give us some kind of immortality and some kind of a way to outlive and to outlive the gods perhaps. But of course this doesn't work for Midas. And the result of this is in fact the Minotaur that's in the middle of the maze. So this story leads on to the Minotaur being formed. And so a monstrosity happens because of his greed and because of his unwillingness to really comprehend what that symbol was and what the reality was. Meanwhile, we have Hermes as like a counterpoint to this story. It says at the very beginning of his story that he's very hungry, and he's specifically hungry for meat. But then later on in the story, when he's stolen the cattle of Apollo and he's sacrificed the 2 cows, it really goes into detail of while he's sacrificing and cooking, because he's invented fire at this point and he's cooking up the steak. and he's smelling it, and it smells so good to him. He can smell the deliciousness of that meat, but then he does not eat any. So this is the difference, in a sense, between Hermes and his approach and Midas and his approach. And the reason that he doesn't eat any is because he knows that that is for the gods. Even though he is a god, he's still able to make that distinction that this is not to be partaken upon here. And if he does partake here, then he will miss out on the higher riches that he knows are coming for him. So in the end, the trickster god has a much better sense of reverence when it comes to this moment than Midas, the king, which is a nice kind of way that all of this gets turned around. And so that's the thing of like, ultimately, this money, this moneta, it does still belong to Hera and the sacred cows. And if only we are able to give it back and realize that everything we've been given is a bit like Midas has been given from the ocean. And it's great to have things, but we've got to remember that anything that we've been given in this world is really more than anything a matter of chance that we got born into this particular situation and not into another situation. Which kind of takes me in a way to Plato's Symposium, and one of my favorite reflections on the world of money and resources, and the second house comes from this symposium. And one of these guys, and symposium just simply means a drinking party where all of these guys are getting together and drinking and pontificating. It's a really fun story. One of the guys talks about Eros as being the child of poverty and resourcefulness. True value is born in the tension between longing and ingenuity. And so it's interesting to think about that, right? Like if you're in a state of genuinely not having enough, then it's hard really to think about anything else except for getting that bread on the table. But then again, on the other side of things, if you're too resourced, it can be also very hard to be creative, because it's almost like, what's the point in being creative? So there's this tensional point that is being spoken about that I find really interesting, is that it's Eros that is born out of that. And we've got to remember that Eros is the son of Aphrodite. And as I said earlier, Aphrodite has a relationship with that second house, in that she is the ruler of Taurus, and Taurus is associated with the second. So Eros is born into that particular tension. I also find it interesting how on the bigger scale, oftentimes money is the thing that has such a destructive influence on culture. This idea that we don't particularly use so much anymore, but the idea of selling out. Like if we think about Star Wars, the very first Star Wars, and then Empire Strikes Back, and how extraordinary those movies are, how true they are to the mythic and the archetypal worlds, and how timeless the tales that they tell are. And then it's interesting watching the change that happens in Return of the Jedi, because suddenly George Lucas realized that he could make a lot more money by selling these dolls. From telling the timeless tales, he moves into the money-making proposition of like how many toys I can sell, and thus invents the Ewoks, thinking that the Ewoks will be, this way to sell so many more toys. And it was a way to sell so many more toys. And so he did make all that extra money with the invention of the Ewoks, but also lost some of the beauty. Suddenly this sacred thing that was something that belonged to the Creative Commons in a way, even though it came through George Lucas and all of the others that worked on those movies, suddenly it had been sold from beneath us. And it became this lesser than movie in Return of the Jedi, where it didn't really reach the same heights. And I do wonder if part of that is, or a big part of that is, that it was sold from under our feet. And subsequent years, you can just look at what happens, that the more these things get sold, the more they lose their value. Like look at the sale of Star Wars to Disney and everything that's happened since then. I think no matter where you're looking at it from, what angle you're looking at it from, it doesn't reach anywhere near the heights of those early movies. The goal just becomes money at that point and not art. And that is essentially the book that I referred to, The Gift, is really a brilliant book that I highly recommend. I'll put a link in the show notes, and the book is ultimately about how to keep art as a sacred practice in a world where obviously we have to put bread on the table, we have to be able to feed ourselves, and we have to be resourceful, we have to make money. In that process, how do we not lose ourselves? How do we not sell out? How do we not cheapen the very thing that we've dedicated our lives to in order to make the bottom line work? There's a Grimm brothers fairy tale called The Fisherman and His Wife. This fisherman and his wife, they live in real poverty. He sees this fish, and the fish begins to talk and asks him to let him go. And the fish has ultimately said, hey, I'm a prince. You don't really want to catch me and eat me. So he lets him go. When he tells his wife about this, she says, well, did you ask for any wishes? And the fisherman's like, no, I didn't really think about that. And so the wife sends him back. Let's get him to give us a cottage. So he goes back and he makes a wish. He says, my wife wants a cottage. And he says, yeah, it's done. And then once it's done, the wife is like, oh, that's amazing. Well, let's have a castle instead. So he goes back. Okay, my wife wants a castle. And then he goes and he says it's done. And each time he goes back to the water is becoming a little bit more murky and a little less clear and a little more, over time, it becomes almost like molten lava water, the more that he's doing this. Because, of course, there's an insatiable desire here because, it goes back, the wife then wants to be king. And then when she's king, that's not enough. She wants to be emperor. And then when she's emperor, that's not enough. She wants to be pope. And then when she's a pope, that's not enough. She wants to be God. And when the fisherman goes back to the water to ask the fish if she can be God, the fish sends him home and they're back in their original hovel. So it's almost like the thirst for power and the thirst for more. It's just kind of insatiable, especially in the realm where there isn't, it's all relative, and wealth can be like that. It's all relative. So the more you get, the more you want. And that's a really, that's a real danger of that second house, which kind of brings me to Saturn here. See, Saturn gets such a bad rap within astrology because it's all about blocks and limits and all of these kinds of things. But we can forget that Saturn actually ruled over the Golden Age. So why is that? Why did Saturn rule over the Golden Age? Well, Saturn in astrology is about limits, and Jupiter, its counterpart, is about expansion. And in fact, once Jupiter expansion takes over from Saturn, which is limits, things get worse and worse and worse for humans, even though you would think with all those restrictions gone, things would get better and better and better. But in fact, it's the other way around. I think it's a deep message from the ancient world to remind us that it's actually living within our limits and living, as I said at the opening of the episode, in right relationship with nature and in right relationship with each other, that we actually all become truly wealthy. And in this mad world that we're in right now, where we've gone so far away from that, I wonder what it is that could bring us back to that way of seeing the world, to that way of seeing each other, and that way of seeing money. So there we are. We've had a nice tour here through the second house and all of the philosophical underpinnings and a few different mythic tones in here. So now as you look around, I wonder what could be done in this house. I wonder if there's a little bit of freshening up to do, anything that needs a bit of a dusting off. And I wonder, as you look around this house, what is truly valuable in here? What would you want to truly keep? And what would you want to throw away? What would you want to stop hoarding? And what would you really want to cherish? Maybe you want to put an altar in here to Hera, and put her effigy up on the wall, and put some candles around her, and a few crystals and things, so that Hera knows that you're still thinking of her when you're thinking of money. And maybe if we bring that reverence back to money, Hera will bring her reverence back to us and stop giving us such a hard time. So, as we've really settled in now to this second house and we've really had a good look around, we might begin to move, and then the stillness of that second house will give way to the winds of the third house, the house of speech, learning, siblings, and early environment. But we'll only really get there if we've grounded in the body, claimed what's ours, and laid a solid foundation. So I look forward to going with you guys into the third house soon. Meanwhile, there'll be a fairy tale coming up that'll come up in the next week or so. And I've got a great conversation coming up as well with Cameron Allen, the astrologer. We just had a fantastic conversation, and we're going to split that into two parts. One is going to be second house related, and the second part will be the third house. So I'm looking forward to bringing that to you too. Thanks a lot for joining me today, and see you next time. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.